Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning back into Let's Play Chroma Squad. Now, today's episode happens to be a bonus episode because I was approached in the thread about talking combos, whether it be skill combos within a particular role, as well as actor-role combinations that can support those. So, today's bonus episode is the first in a series called Know Your Role. And for this series, we're going to focus on the Techie to start with. Now, I'm using a file of mine that I had beaten the game with prior to the director's cut, so ignore the numbers because, well, they're not going to be relevant for the LP, but I wanted to show the full skill tree to explain these combinations well. So if you're following along in the thread for the main LP and you don't want this spoiler info, please stop watching now. You're all good, I suppose. Well, here we go. Now we enter into spoiler territory. Now, why did I pick the Techie? Well, the Techie kind of has a good example of the three different primary build paths that I see on characters. The Assist has our own little bag of tricks that kind of throws that out of whack, but everybody else has pretty much two different offensive paths and a utility path. Of those offensive paths, the first one we're going to talk about is a minion killer path. Minion killer paths are meant to deal a lot of damage to a large number of foes. In a lot of ways, they are your AoE damage path, and it's not a bad way to think of it that way. Their main goal, though, is intentionally trying to clear the chaff to mitigate damage from incoming from minions, and so that you can go ahead and focus on the boss. Certain director's instructions will make those objectives slightly different, but that's why you get to see them up front, so you can always tailor to each mission. Now, for the Techie's minion killer path, it's going to look very similar for a little while with what we're currently using in-game, but again, it's early on, so things are a little easier, and on higher difficulties, well, I wouldn't be using the alien as I am. So, for rank 1, we're going to be using multi-shot. Multi-shot has a decent-sized AoE, it requires a ranged weapon, which is what your Techie should always be using, and it deals a significant amount of damage. 85% is not bad from your weapon attack. And while that actually I think goes with your base attack, it's not really going to make much of a difference in the long run. Any loss you get is built back up by your Season 2 Sniper Cat. Now, Season 2, we take Sniper Cat. Again, this is kind of something you can see in the main LP, because, well, more damage dealt means more minions that go down quicker. You want to get rid of those nutcrackers, you want to get rid of those bread crumblers, you want to get rid of other enemy types we haven't seen yet pretty fast if you can, and Sniper Cat helps you do that. In Season 3, well, I'm going to mention this now, because every character gets one. There is an audience booster skill. Never use it, it's not useful. For the minion killer, we're going to go with weapon expertise, and by the way, you're going to see a lot of that too. The plus 30% damage is just raw benefit, and it will apply to your multi-shot, it will apply to your pistol shot or your rifle shot on your weapon skill shots, it will apply to a team attack finisher, and it's just very good in the long run. Your Season 4 for the Techie is kind of a player's choice here. You see, neither of these skills are truly aggressive and offensive. But for a minion killer, you want multi-shot off at the cooldown as much as possible, so I would go with Energy Reserve. It also means you can play a little bit with your gearing options, and I'll get to that later. Cool Invention is still useful, and I'll talk about that a bit more in it, with the boss killer and definitely with the utility build, because it has its uses. But by getting the skill regen here, it lessens the importance of RNG when it comes to your crafted gear, and it means you might be able to prioritize a little bit more attack here and there. Our Season 5 skills are pretty good because they're Season 5. Every Season 5 skill is phenomenal in their own right. But we're going to go with Swap Mode. Now, Swap Mode is basically turns the Techie into a boss with regards to knockback, and gives you an extra 30% damage on a skill that lasts 3 turns. Notice, I don't have a very optimized Techie here, but the cooldown is already at 4 turns. You can keep Swap Mode up almost constantly if you've built your Techie right, and you've been lucky with some of your drops, in terms of crafted gear properties. But for a minion killer, you want that extra damage, and even if you don't kill minions at that point, knocking them back so that they cannot re-engage on their next turn means you're mitigating damage, and that can be almost as useful for a minion killer build. But it's not the only path available to the Techie, and the boss killer build in fact starts with the level 1 skill that we haven't used in the LP yet. That is, namely, Find Weakness. Now, Find Weakness is a wonderful skill. It winds up boosting your damage on a target by 30%, and it lasts for a full 3 turns. It's a wonderful skill that lets you target fire down big tanky minions, and there are a couple. The shell shields are not the only ones. And it also goes through and lets you deal a lot more damage on the boss. It's an extra 30%, and it'll apply to team attack weapon finishers, it'll apply to normal attacks. Because it's a setup turn, you could have your assault and your scout weaken the boss to get them into a finisher range. Ultimately, it's great. But a boss killer is going to stick with Sniper Cat because a boss killer is going to prefer a rifle when it's more powerful than a pistol by a good bit. There are seasons where that's not always true, but you want that extra range so that Sniper Cat does more work, so you're dealing more damage as part of a team attack weapon finisher. It's all about positioning with the Techie at that point, because you don't want them really in the thick of things, but you want them to deal as much damage as possible and contribute to that boss kill motivation. Oh man, rank 3, you're still going to see weapon expertise. Now, you can say there's an argument to go for time sink instead of weapon expertise, but a boss kill that happens as fast as possible needs as many iterations of damage buff as possible. But when you go to Season 4, here's where Cool Invention can really wind up being useful. If you apply Find Weakness and Cool Invention on, say, your assault, you're not going to worry about the boss and any minions that are left over burning your assault down. That defense bonus is great, and a heal is always useful. Especially if that heal's not on the assist. Because then, if the assist gets in trouble, you can heal them in a pinch. And with regards to Season 5, again, it's a kill, it's an offensive-oriented build. We're going to stick with SWAT mode. Again, more damage output, more bonuses applying for when you're dealing your team attack weapon finisher. All of that adds up, and it adds up in a significant way. I love the fact that SWAT mode can be on a low cooldown, but here you see more of how my Techie is not so optimized, because it's a 6-turn cooldown without the plus 15 skill regen in Season 4 skills. Energy reserve, that is. Overall, the boss killer build from the Techie is only slightly different, but the slight differences are noticeable, because the Techie loses all their AoE ability to go for a boss killer build, and because they're a boss killer build, they're more of a utilitarian build. They want to stay at range, they're not going to be in the thick of things, they're going to want that rifle, and you're going to tailor some of your equipment to suit that. Now, the final build for the Techie is a utility build. Now, these builds are focused on mitigating damage and filling in where you might have holes or gaps that you need. For a utility build, your Season 1 pick is really up to you, but I find multi-shot to still be more useful. Minion clearing is not something you can specialize in very, very well. Use it where you get it. Now, on the flip side, I go for teleport on this type of Techie, because this type of Techie normally is going to focus more on skill regen, normally is going to focus more on helping their teammates, and may need to get out of dodge for having less health. Don't be surprised when I switch to teleport on the alien for his health concerns. But it also lets you teleport in for a maximum damage multi-shot if you find yourself needing to do that. So there are offensive applications to teleport. I just went with Sniper Cat in the offensive builds for the extra damage. Your rank 3 skill on a utility build will always be Time Sink. It's an AoE that's 1 square larger than multi-shot, and what it does is afflicts folks with -3 move and -50% attack. It is a massive debuff, and it lets you really mitigate threats and control threats by locking them down. Anything that still can attack is going to deal less damage, and in some cases you're going to use Time Sink just to keep folks from running away. Breadcrumblers specifically. You could do weapon expertise, but again, utility builds are about mitigation. A Time Sink is one of the better mitigation tools you have in the game. Assist is recovery, Techie's mitigation. Rank 4, this again, I feel is always going to be player choice, but for a utility build, Cool Invention is just the go-to option for me. It lets you heal, which means you can heal your assist, who doesn't have many self-heals, or when her skills are on cooldown, can't self-heal. And that plus defense can be great. I would love to see how Cool Invention works with Bender as a lead in the middle of, well, a metric ton of enemies, and we may see that in the LP, but even if I don't, it's a strong skill that, when comboed with the assist, you can bring somebody from the brink of death back to full HP. Very, very easily, in fact. So, Cool Invention, definitely a skill worth looking at, worth playing around with in your own particular playthroughs. Now, for a utility build, and particularly for this Techie with his low skill regen, natively, I go with Supreme Nerdiness. Now, if you have a high enough skill regen, you never have to look at Supreme Nerdiness. I don't. The 25% chance to set a skill right back immediately up is wonderful. That means you might get back-to-back teleports, you might get back-to-back time sinks, you might get back-to-back multi-shots. Now, it doesn't mean it won't take the turn from you, but it does mean you can use it again the next turn. That's very specifically not a thing that Supreme Nerdiness will allow. The other thing is, the Techie's built-in bonus of getting free skill regen every time they use a skill really applies stronger when you can spam them. So there will be a point where, in a longer mission, Supreme Nerdiness might wind up making it useless, because you've built up enough skill regen. It's kind of a funny niched case. Now, I'm bringing up the stat menu to kind of talk a little bit about the stats you're generally going to look for on a Techie. Again, my Techie's not optimized, and there's some things you get regardless. Most Techies are going to have to get some amount of health. Our alien's going to need it more than anything. This particular Techie, Hayden, is going to need less of it because, hey, Asthma Law brings plus 30% health. But you want your Techie to be able to survive getting a little bit of threat on them, so you're going to want some health. You're also going to want some skill regen, and that's usually going to come from shop gear, because apparently in Director's Cut they remove skill regen from random properties, but I've heard that but cannot confirm that yet. But health and skill regen are both subjective stats. You're going to want as much as you feel you need, not how much, there's no forced recommendation here. However much you feel you need, and you're comfortable with, go for that amount. Movement is a stat Techies don't need. You have ranged abilities, you don't have to worry about it. And it's one of the few classes that never have to worry about movement. Critical percent comes a lot on your pistols and rifles. A Techie doesn't need that, because a Techie's rarely doing basic attacks, but you're going to get some of it. So don't be worried or surprised if you actually wind up with a fairly significant critical rate on a Techie. It's not ideal, because you'd rather have other stats, but it's not something you're going to have to worry about avoiding either, because it's usually a guaranteed stat. Of the 3 percentage stats, in fact, this Techie is kind of opposite the way I would prefer a Techie. I would say you want to prioritize dodge over critical or counter, mostly because you don't necessarily want to go all in on health on the Techie. Dodge will let you mitigate more damage if the Techie does get in danger. It does apply to ranged attacks from, say, bread crumblers, and while it won't let you dodge skills from bosses, it's useful to mitigate damage where you can. Counter is always good, but it's definitely one of those things where it's not necessary. That said, I'm going to bring up the actor menu real quick and talk a little bit about actor combinations with those specific build paths. Now, that's always going to be somewhat variable, because what build path you get might also be determined by what drops you get from crafted gear. It can happen. Now, the default Techie in the game is J Blues, and J Blues is a good Techie. He brings you skill regen, he brings dodge percent, and he brings critical percent. Now, the critical's not as useful on the Techie outside of the early game, but he's good and competent, but there are better. Now, first off, we have the Alien. The Alien brings an insane amount of skill regen at the cost of a pretty big health penalty. But the Alien is a born and bred utility Techie. Because you can abuse rifles, because you can abuse teleport more easily, multi-shot, and so forth, the Alien brings a lot to the table, And because you're playing that utility play style, you're more naturally going to keep your Techie out of danger, so that health penalty isn't as relevant. Is the alien the best? Nah, probably not. But he's a very competitive pick, and he very much aligns well with the utility build path. As far as minion kills go, we have Weasley Stripes. Now, this is a Wesley Snipes parody character for obvious reasons, but it brings a lot to the table, because Weasley Stripes brings not only a health percentage bonus, which is useful for a minion killer because you're going to have to expose that Techie to damage, but plus 30% pistol damage. A minion killer is not going to want rifles. I'll say that up front and I'll say it again. A minion killer is not going to want rifles. You will want pistols. Because you're dealing that extra 30% pistol damage, it all will add up. Now, you could argue that because of the way multi-shot actually works, Weasley is not as good, but I like the extra health, and using that pistol when multi-shot's off cooldown means dealing with particularly problematic threats. Breadcrumbers, shell shields, insert a couple of minions we haven't seen yet, or even just plinking away at the boss when you have other boss killers in your build between rounds. He's a good character for that purpose. Now, Telemelia is probably only best suited as a Techie, and it's only if you find you need a lot more mecha health. It's definitely a case of your mileage will vary, but that's about the only slot I see him fitting in. But if we want to get true talk about things, we're going to look at Michael Florian if you like your shop discounts, because he brings skill regen, and you're looking at another option for a utility Techie, because that minus 15% attack really does kind of drag him down on damage output. But the shop discount can get you better gear sooner. It's really kind of worthwhile, and it applies to materials packs, so if you're buying cardboard packs for your mecha, it pays off. But for the boss killer role, I do prefer Gus Fune. Now this is definitely more of those min-max options here. -1 movement on a Techie doesn't really hurt you too bad, but what he brings is very potent. Plus 20% attack will influence the damage you're dealing with your multi-shot because it's a base attack, and plus 25% team attack damage is insane. Now, as far as team attack damage goes, there's buffs elsewhere, and you could argue Gus Fune might be more valuable in another position, but because of that -1 movement, there's very few positions I find him to be very good at. I want skill regen on the assist for what should be obvious reasons. I want my lead to be able to move, and my scout, well, I think you've already seen how we have a better scout than Gus Fune would make. But for a boss killer Techie, you really can't outdo Gus Fune. Ultimately, if you find movement to be a problem on your own playthroughs, you can mitigate that with readily available shop gear by Season 3, I think. So it's not too much of a problem, but because the Techie loves to be at range, particularly the boss killer build, it's not as much of a problem. So I find that to be the only other actor to really be worthwhile here. As a shout-out pick, Mr. Beaver can be a good one, but Mr. Beaver we've seen elsewhere as well. And Antitonic for his plus 10% health and plus 10% dodge is also a honorable mention among actor candidates for the Techie role. That said, that brings us to the end of this particular Know Your Role. Now, I will talk a bit more about team combinations when it comes to role combinations as a 6th Know Your Role video, but I'll also bring those up in the LP as I can actually use them. So if you're waiting for some of those, just wait a little longer. In the meantime, I do appreciate you all joining me for today's very special bonus episode. I hope you enjoyed the Tactics Talk with Know Your Role, and we will have our regularly scheduled episode later this week. Thank you for joining me. I've been the Ronin of Dreams, and stay frosty out there.